Okay, everybody. It's just a couple days now after the Oscars, and there's always one other video I like to do, and that's the March Madness bracket preview. This is just my picks on the year here, and I usually I follow college basketball, not religiously, but enough to know the teams and who's good and who's bad and everything, and kind of like last year, this is a strange year. This is a year where you've got a lot of teams that are okay, a lot of teams that typically can beat other teams on given days and stuff. And I think that's true this year as well, but I think to a lesser extent. There isn't really, as we've seen in previous years, a dominant team. You've got traditional blue bloods and stuff. There's a couple blue bloods that are not included this year, like Michigan and North Carolina, just to name a couple there. And anymore, you've got some teams that used to be considered, hey, you were usually in, like Purdue. They're back in, of course. Even teams nowadays like Alabama, if you didn't consider UCLA a blue blood before, they're kind of feeling more like a blue blood nowadays. Michigan State's kind of usually been one that's in there, and yeah, they're in. But it's kind of a different one as well. UConn is back in, of course, this year. So yeah, we'll go through these. Before we do, though, I did just tonight see the new Ant-Man as well. If I can sum that up in like a minute or two. It was a mess. Probably one of the weakest Marvel movies I've seen in a while. Well, Eternals was pretty all over the place too. So I think I would rather, as long as it was and as many characters as there were and everything, and as much as that one was also all over the place, I think I'd rather rewatch that one, because this one, it's like, okay, you do get there's some decent angles in it. There's some decent sequences in it. There's one particular sequence that reminds me of the dream sequence, the Mysterio sequence from the second Spider-Man in this series. That was Far From Home, I think. Yeah, some of those titles all blur together. But yeah, that one I remember being a standout sequence in that film. Like one I was like, oh, I'm going to remember that, and I do. There's one sequence in this that's reminiscent of that, not exactly a duplicate of it, but reminiscent of it. I'm like, yeah, that's a cool sequence, and that's one I think I'm going to remember. But otherwise, I mean, they really, it's just 2 hours of kind of throwing stuff at the screen. You don't really get invested in the villain. You don't get very invested in the heroes. Yeah, it was kind of a mess. I think I'm a 5 out of 10 on it. I can't recommend it. Yeah, I guess we can go into it another time. But for the 12 of you who are still watching, let's go ahead and get into our picks here. So in years past, too, for the basketball stuff here, I have been kind of able to name a player or two on each team, or close to that level if I've been following them enough. And I'll be able to do that with a couple teams this year. But otherwise, it's a year where it's like, okay, you had to have watched a lot and followed them a lot to kind of figure out who's who and everything. And it's like, there's certain conferences too where it's like, okay, they were doing really well, and there's certain ones that were kind of in and out of the top 25 a lot in the AP poll and stuff and all that. But yeah, I guess we'll go ahead. What we can do here, I think I did this last year and it worked okay, is go bracket by bracket, first round in this bracket, then first round, then first round, then first round. Then we'll go to the second round and then go bracket to bracket again, on and on till we get to our national championship. Okay, let's start. I've got my trusty bracket here, and I'm not giving away my picks this time. Anyway, so let's go ahead and start here. So we'll kind of work from the top to the bottom here. The first seed in the South is Alabama, and yeah, it's kind of, I've watched a little bit of them through the season here. Kind of controversial team nowadays because of the whole Brandon Miller situation, which, frankly, I don't think he should be playing. That's my opinion, and I don't know all the facts yet. I don't think anybody knows all the facts yet, but just if it was me, I would pull him and just be like, sorry, kid. I know you're a big NBA prospect, but the self-respect we have for our team and our university matters more than getting a championship, or potentially a championship if they go very far in the tourney. So if that was me. But that being said, you can't deny he's also a great talent, and he's also, a high scoring player for a reason. He's a good player, so you can't, I guess, yeah, to a small degree, I understand the circumstances they're under, but it's like that's a very concrete line, and it's like if you cross that, yeah, you're going to get some egg on your face, and I think Alabama's going to get egg on their face, and I think there's certainly people out there that are going to be rooting for Alabama to lose, maybe just because of that aspect. But I do not see them losing to who are they again? They won tonight. It's Texas A&M Corpus Christi. There's a couple games that get played here tonight and a couple tomorrow. And last I checked, Mississippi State was up on Pittsburgh. They're playing in a different bracket, but we'll probably get to them later here. Anyway, something just came up on my screen, so that's probably why you saw the lighting change. But let's go back. Okay, there we go. Alabama's. We've only seen one 16 seed beat a 1 seed in history. Of course, it was the year I picked Virginia. So yeah, I get some bad memories from that. But that's not going to happen this year. So Bama advances easily in that one. 8-9 matchup is going to be Maryland versus West Virginia. Maybe it's just me. Every time I've seen West Virginia play, they play like shit. They play like absolute garbage. And I hate saying that because we've got an Iowa transfer in there. We've got Joe Toussaint in there, and but yeah, every time I've watched them play, they play horribly. So I don't, just based on that, I don't know how the fuck they made this fucking tournament. And a team like Rutgers, which took down Purdue and stuff, gets left out. And even how North Carolina, who played Alabama, even though it was early in the season, and took them to 4 overtimes before I think it was Bama that won. How they're left out too, and I get it. North Carolina also hit a lot of skids in the season and stuff, but yeah, a team like West Virginia, to me, just having watched them when I can, it's like oof. And their 19-14 record, yeah, I get it's in a great conference this year. Big 12 is really a strong conference this year, but I don't know. I see Maryland really winning this. I might just be dead wrong about that one because I see the odds makers already favoring West Virginia, but I got to go with a couple Big Ten teams here and there. So Maryland I'm going to pick. Next up is the 6-11 matchup. That's San Diego State versus Charleston. Or is this the 5? Sorry, I think I'm on the wrong one here. This is the 5-12. The 5-12, excuse me. And Charleston, they have one of the better records in the tournament, 31-3. But when you come from a small conference, yeah, you don't really get too many great players through the year that you got to face up against. San Diego State, in the meantime, they kind of struggled, I saw, with a couple of their games when they got into their conference championship, or conference series, I should say, at the end. But I still see them walking away with a victory here, so San Diego State will advance to the second round. Next up is the 4-13 matchup. That's Virginia against Furman. Both of them have very similar records, 25-7 for Virginia and 27-7 for Furman. Virginia, though, the ACC this year, not great. Again, when I watched quite a bit, actually, of the Duke versus Virginia ACC championship, I got to say, very sloppy play. That was a very sloppy game, and it was a miracle that Duke got above 55 points in that game. I know some of these games, yeah, you do get to the end. I can even remember the national championship here a few years ago, and it was Gonzaga against North Carolina. That was the first March Madness I fully was following, and I actually had a spot on the radio where I was able, recapping games with another guy that knew a lot more than I did at the time. And I'd like to think I know just a little bit more than I did back then. Anyways, yeah, that's a story for another time. But anyways, I get it. Yeah, sometimes you do get these great teams that do match up, and it's after they've gone through the gauntlet, and all that. So they're very tired. They're shot. I get that, but still, no. When I was watching that game, I'm like, oh yeah, ACC is just not. Usually they've got a lot of dependable teams in there, but Virginia, and they're another low-scoring team. They're more a defensive team and everything, late in the shot clock type of team. So somebody like Furman, I can see even halftime, even 5 minutes into the second half, leading Virginia. But I think Virginia will get out of this one, and they'll advance. Next is the 6-11. This is Creighton versus North Carolina State. North Carolina State was kind of a surprise entry here. And Creighton, I have watched some Big East through the year here as well. they're a very spotty team at 21-12. Their record reflects that, and they're playing in a tougher conference again than North Carolina State is. But I'm going to give the advantage to Creighton here by a small margin. These 6-11s can be pretty dangerous, but I'm going to go with the 6 in this one and say Creighton advances. Next up, what seeding is this? 3 and 14. 3 and 14. You've got Baylor as the 3 seed and Santa Barbara as the 14 seed here. Baylor, I think Baylor just advances. Yeah, you once in a while will get these 14 over 3s. Like I think was it last year or the year before? Texas was a 3, and they played Texas Southern. Texas Southern advanced, and they were the lower seed. But Baylor, even though they've got a 22-10 record, they are in a tougher conference. And Baylor's a team when it's like they're firing on all cylinders, they'll kick your ass. So I think Baylor's gonna advance. Next is the 7-10 matchup. This is Missouri against Utah State. Utah State, one of 4 teams in the Mountain West to make the tournament, which, I kind of asked a couple people, I'm like, when's the last time we saw a smaller conference like that get 4 entries in there? I guess this is a conference that has gotten 2 or 3 in the past. That being said, I don't predict a great outcome for Utah State. I think Missouri can get them. Missouri, the SEC, is probably one of the most battle-hardened teams conferences as well this year. Them and Big 12, I think you got to put on a pedestal above most everybody else. Big 10 was very sloppy. Lots and lots of teams that randomly can win. Minnesota, as bad as they were, they could still win some games. Nebraska, as inconsistent as they were, they could win some games. Iowa, we're pretty inconsistent this year. But we can beat a team like Indiana, who was ranked, on the road by 20. See, it's a weird, wonky conference this year. But yeah, Missouri I see advancing here. Then you got the 2 against the 15, Arizona against Princeton. I'll tell you what, the Ivy League teams are known for their first round upsets. It's been a little while since we've seen one, so I thought, depending on where they're ranked, depending on who they play, I said this could be the comeback year. This could be the year where we get that Ivy League upset again. It's Zona. They just beat UCLA. I think there's a small shot that it could happen. Princeton was not favored against Yale, I saw in the conference championship for the Ivy Leagues. But it's a tough one. If they had drawn another 2 seed, like potentially a Marquette, then I would see a lot more into it, and I might have the balls to call it, but I'm not going to have the balls to call that Zona will be a 2 seed that goes down this year. My pick last year to win it all was Kentucky. They didn't lose to an Ivy League. They lost to St. Peter's, who started their kind of Cinderella run there. But no, not this time. No, I don't see it. Okay, so that's the end of the first round for the South bracket. Let's move on to the Midwest. Here we've got Houston as the number 1 overall seed. Houston coming out of the American Conference. Really, they basically only play like 1 or 2 teams that can beat them once in a while. Temple was one of them this year, kind of a big egg-on-your-face loss. The other one was to Memphis, which I should have bet on Memphis, but I didn't on the ACC Conference Championship. But still, that being said, Houston, I think, comes out because they're going to play Northern Kentucky first round. Again, a 1 versus 16. Houston wins. Then you've got your 8-9. This is our Iowa Hawkeyes against Auburn. I hate to do it to you, but I think Auburn, they don't blow the doors off, but this is not a hard pick for me, unfortunately. Iowa has just been too inconsistent through the season here. Auburn, again, coming from a much harder conference, a battle-hardened conference that took, in the last 2-3 weeks, they took Alabama to overtime and still almost won in overtime. So I got to pick Auburn for this one. Next up, we have the 5-12 matchup, Miami versus Drake. Drake is another close university where I'm at right now. I'll tell you what, I like the Bulldogs in this one. I do. Miami lost. I don't remember the player's name, but there was a good I think it was their good defensive player. I've heard went out in the game there, the semifinals for ACC. So there's going to be a hole to fill there, and Drake, as kind of inconsistent as they were in the Missouri Valley Conference, I think they can get on a tear here. They can do it. They were not favored against Bradley, and they kind of killed Bradley at the end of it there for their conference championship. So if they ride that wave of momentum, there you go. They can beat Miami, and it'll be a 12/5. So I'm picking Drake here. Next up is the 4-13 matchup. One of my brackets I had, because this is Indiana as the 4 seed, Kent State as the 13 seed. Kent State in one of my other brackets, not my official one of my other brackets, I loved them as a Cinderella team this year. I watched them play their conference championship, and I thought, that looks like a solid team. That being said, Indiana for me this year is a team that if I bet for them, they can't do it. If I bet against them, they win. So in this other bracket, I feel like I have to take Indiana for this. This could be a very close game, and I could be just kicking myself because I'm like, I saw the Cinderella, and this could do it. Because if they do happen, whether it's Drake or Miami, they would play second round. Kent State, I think I would favor in that. And then, can they take Houston? I don't know. Houston, with some of these smaller teams like Temple, they struggled. Then they went back and killed Temple the second time. Not to, for all that purposes and stuff. But that being said, yeah, I'm picking Indiana here, but Kent State, very much, I think, of a lot of teams this year, of these, coming out of a smaller conference, not very well known, I think VCU, or possibly, who was my third one here? Hold on. I'll look through them. I don't think we've gotten to them yet. Yes, we have not gotten to them yet. Of those, I think this could be a very plausible Cinderella this year. So, yeah, if you're smart, you might just take Kent State in this game over Indiana, the 13 over the 4. Next up is the 6-11 matchup. This is the Iowa State Cyclones against the winner of Pitt or Mississippi State. Again, they're playing right now, but I think Mississippi State, again, they're coming out of a much tougher conference, and, really were fighting at the end there to get in, and they got in, and, it shows there. They do trail by 1 at halftime here, but I'm presuming it's going to be them. Either team, whether it's Pitt or Iowa State, by the way, I do like, if it was Iowa State versus Pitt, I like Iowa State a lot more in that game. Against Mississippi State, though, you've got two teams from two really tough conferences matching up there. But either way, I'm going to take Iowa State here. This is a close one. These 6-11s, again, can be very dangerous, but I'll take the 6 here. Next up is our 3-14 matchup. Kennesaw State is your 14 seed. Xavier is your 3 seed. And Xavier was a team that was very good to me in my betting and stuff early on in the year. They've let me down a couple times, though. But this first round, I see Xavier winning. Next is the 7 and 10 seed. This is Texas A&M versus Penn State. And I know it looks good on paper to pick Texas A&M here, but Penn State has shown something here in the last 2-3 weeks that is really hard to deny. They're a team that when their back was against the wall, they pushed back and they fought hard. And they, arguably were going to be one of these first 4 teams a week ago. Then they made their run through the Big Ten tournament and came this close to beating Purdue in the tournament. So I like Penn State here. I like the upset here. I like a Big Ten over an SEC team here. And I like Penn State in this game. The 10 seed advances. Next up is the 2 seed Texas against 15 seed Colgate. Texas. I know Texas had a rough start to the year with them losing their coach. And they had a tough, kind of a big loss against Kansas State. Again, that's just kind of how the Big 12 is this year. There's a couple upsets here and there that come. But Texas, especially the way they punished Kansas there in the Big 12 championship, I think they've got a good rhythm going right now. So I easily see Texas advancing past Colgate, and we'll see where they go from there. Next up is going to be the East bracket. This one, you have Purdue as your 1 seed here, and Purdue, coming from the Big Ten, I do think this is the weakest 1 seed, and if any 1 seed, they're not going to lose this first game, the winner of Texas Southern or Farley Dickinson. But Purdue, yeah, they're going to win that first game. Zach Edey is, a very strong player, of course, and as long as he's one of the taller players on the court, yeah, he's not going to have a problem, I don't think. Purdue advances in that first game. Next up is the 8-9 matchup, and Florida Atlantic is our 9 seed, and I can't remember the last time we saw a small conference team get a seeding this high, not that I can remember at least. There's probably an example out there somewhere, in the last 5-10 years. I just can't think of it. And Memphis is our 8th seed. And I'll tell you what, Florida Atlantic, I don't think they play anybody. So Memphis, after what they've shown, I see this being a steamroll. As an 8-9 matchup, normally these are supposed to be the hardest ones. Memphis, I have Memphis by a mile here. I could be dead wrong, but I really like Memphis here. So that's my 8-9 matchup. The 5-12 is going to be Duke versus Oral Roberts. This one, I'll tell you what, I know a lot of people are pissed off that Duke was not a 3 or a 4 seed. I was going to be pissed if they were. Just from what I've seen this year, I know they've got that 26-8 record, but again, the ACC is just not the conference that it was the last few years. And Duke, they've had a couple head-scratching losses this year. They've got a new coach. They, as much as, probably Kentucky or some of these other traditional blue bloods, they've gotten through the whole, first year out, kind of thing with NBA draft and everything. So they do have a couple experienced players on there this year, but Oral Roberts, though, is a team that that's a tough 12-5 matchup. And Oral Roberts coming out of the Summit Valley, or Summit League, rather, Summit, coming out of the Summit League. Remember, they made a run here a couple of years ago, and they were the Cinderella a couple of years ago. So I would keep an eye out here. And again, I think my other bracket, I did pick Oral Roberts here, but I like, at least in this round, I'm going to wuss out and pick Duke here. I'm not going to go another 12 over 5. Duke. Yeah, but I think this is one where they barely advance. Like, this is a buzzer beater, Christian Laettner moment. Funny enough, he was a Duke player. Kind of win, I see, for Duke here. Another one I was really close on taking an upset on is our 4-13 matchup, Tennessee against the Ragin' Cajuns out of Louisiana. And a lot of smart people are picking Louisiana here to win. Tennessee is a team, again, they've burned me a couple times hardcore this year, 23-10 record. But, again, you're coming out of a conference that sees a lot of competition and a lot of tough games. I like Tennessee in this game, but again, this is one I was really close to picking, to have the second round in this bracket be a 13 and a 12. I was really close to doing that. Next up is our 6-11 matchup. That's Kentucky against Providence. And Kentucky, they've had their big struggles this year. It's true. But when it mattered most, they came back and won some good games. Providence, in the meantime, in the Big East, both of them, by the way, do have a 21-11 record. The Big East, again, a team like Providence last year was really great, but this year, again, they've had their ups and downs. And by the way, the leader of the Providence team is a transfer from Kentucky, so this is going to be a bloody, bloody battle this year. But, again, you got to look at it. The Big East versus the SEC. I got to favor the SEC team here. I got to go Kentucky, but by a small margin. Again, a small margin, and I'm not going to be shocked at all if Providence ends up winning this game. This is going to be very much one that I can see some people just like, just pick, this might be a one and done for this corner of the bracket. We'll see. Next up is our 3-14 matchup. That's Kansas State versus Montana State. Again, similar records here. Kansas State is 23-9. Montana State is 25-9. Kansas State is a team this year that they beat Kentucky, or they beat Kansas at Kansas. They beat Texas. That was at Texas, right? That big, it was like 118 to 104 or whatever, kind of January matchup there that I remember I took Kansas plus something in the betting, and it was it was like a plus 200 or something, or 250, which normally I don't take those. But it hit, and I was so happy. That was such a good day. But no, Kansas State. I like Kansas State in this one. Next up is our 7-10 matchup, and that's Michigan State versus USC. The Pac-12 outside of Arizona and outside of UCLA has been very soft, and I'm kind of even now surprised that USC is in there. Michigan State. I know. Again, I know it's coming from Big Ten Conference, and they're not as strong, but Michigan State. They've, where they've even early on in the season when they had like that Gonzaga game on the Carrier around Veterans Day, they showed they were that close to beating Gonzaga. And of course, Gonzaga this year nowhere near as good as they have been in recent years. And getting a 3 seed in their West bracket, even I was like, okay, I guess they're a little better than UConn. I guess, obviously, playing in their conference, you don't really have too many opponents. You've got St. Mary's, and you've got once in a while you'll get some. But yeah, and Zags have had a couple times where they've been upset this year, but we'll get to them when we get to them. Michigan State, though, I do like against USC. Then you got again a 2:15 here, Marquette versus Vermont, and Marquette. Just pick Marquette here. Yeah. Ended up being a very strong player in the Big East, so yeah, I like him there. And we'll wrap up with the West bracket. Your first round lineups are number 1 Kansas, last year's champion, against Howard, the 16 seed. Kansas rolls them, pretty easy. Our 8-9 matchup here. This is the one 8-9 matchup that I'm like, ooh, pins and needles. This one is really tough. Arkansas against Illinois. And I've picked a lot of Big Ten teams in these a couple of these first rounds. But like another SEC versus Big Ten matchup, Auburn and Iowa, I'm picking the SEC team this year. Illinois, their 20-12 record. There's a couple games this year in the Big Ten they should have won and didn't. Arkansas, very much, though, in the same territory. So this is why an 8-9 matchup like this is one of the closest. This is very much like the Kentucky Providence game, where it's like I was up in the air on this one. I ended up picking Arkansas on this, and I like the Hogs in this one over the Illini. Next up is our 5-12 matchup. This is St. Mary's against VCU. Again, very similar record here: 26-7 for St. Mary's. VCU has 27-7. But VCU, I got to pick one of the lower seeds here again. I got to go the 12 over the 5 on this one as well. St. Mary's, just the way they got hammer blown against Gonzaga at the end there, when some thought, hey, there was actually a small chance that St. Mary's might pull off the victory again against Gonzaga this year. One of the few times in history they would win twice in the same year against Gonzaga. Not even close. Not even close. So VCU. Then you got UConn versus Iona. Iona is another one this year that a lot of people like as a Cinderella team. I was going to pick them if it was anybody. Hardly it was. If they ended up being a 13 seed. Okay, your other 4 seeds. Tennessee. If it was Tennessee versus Iona, in a heartbeat, I would pick Iona. If it was, who's our 4 seed again in the East? It was that's Tennessee. Sorry. Our 4 seed, though, in the South bracket, Virginia. Again, I think maybe not a heartbeat, but I probably would have ended up picking Iona there. And our other 4 seed, Indiana, against Kent State. That one is a tougher one. That's a tougher one. But I think I maybe still would have gone Indiana on that one. But when you're coming up against UConn, that's tough. That's tough. They were undefeated in the Big East and undefeated on the season for a while there for a reason. It's UConn. I like the Huskies here, but Iona, they're always a tough out the first time when they're in and when they have a team that's pretty solid, and they're 27-7 on the year. So they're a tough out, but UConn I see pulling it off by probably maybe not by a lot first round, but I see them. If they advance to the second round against VCU, I see them having a much easier time there. Next up would be our 6-11 matchup, and TCU will play the winner of Arizona State and Nevada. Just in that game, by the way, Arizona State I can see winning that one. Nevada, I watched them at the end, and they really did not look like a solid team. Who was our Mountain West champion again? It was, are they further down in this bracket? Boise State? I can't remember who was to beat them, but yeah, doesn't matter. Either way, it's. I think TCU will win this one. Again, you're coming out of the Big 12. TCU, a lot of these Texas teams this year are pretty damn good. I like TCU in this one. Then you've got number 3 Gonzaga against Grand Canyon. The Lopes are on a bit of a streak here. They were not favored to win their conference, but here they come, back into the tourney again. Iowa, I remember, beat them a couple years ago like it was nothing, but. That being said, the Zags, they're not as strong this year, but I don't think they're weak enough for the Lopes to beat them. So I got to go Gonzaga in the first round. Next up is the 7-10 matchup, Northwestern against Boise State. Northwestern, man, this is a team that's a saw blade you don't want to get on the wrong end of in the tournament here. So I got to pick Northwestern again over another Mountain West team. And the 2-15 matchup would be UCLA versus UNC Asheville. UCLA. yeah, they might not have exactly the core, exactly the team that they had a few years ago, 2 years ago, when they went from the first four to the final four, and then played almost undeniably the best game of college basketball that we've seen in arguably a decade or two, and that was the UCLA versus Gonzaga Final Four matchup. Absolutely, hands down. I was with my immediate family, and we all sat there at the end because most of us will watch a good deal of basketball through the season. All of us were like exhausted at the end of that game. Great. It was an overtime game. It had buzzer beaters. It was exactly what you wanted out of college basketball, and it was epic. And again, absolutely, that is one of the best games I've ever seen played. UCLA wins this. They might not, again, they don't have that strong a team this year as that year probably, even though they did start as a first four team. But yeah, I like them in this one. All right, next up, we'll go to the second round matchups, and we will again go bracket to bracket on that one. So I have advancing from the first round in the South, the 1 seed Bama and the 8 seed Maryland. Bama takes care of business here. Yeah, they'll win. Maryland, they're a decent team. They're a team that once in a while will do like a 20 turnover game and they'll just lose by 15. Other games, they'll win by 10 to 15. And it's against an opponent on, sometimes some of them are road games too. So Bama, I can see having a little bit of a tougher time here. The same way Northwestern gave Gonzaga a tough time here 5 years ago, or 6 years ago now, the 2017 year. Again, that was one I remember very much so. But Bama advances in that one. Then you've got your 5-4 matchup, second round. That would be San Diego State versus Virginia. And as much as I'm not a huge Virginia fan, I can't help but not, I have to pick them in this one because San Diego State's not strong enough to advance, I don't think. So it would be Virginia advancing in that one. Our next matchup would be number 6 Creighton against number 3 Baylor, and again Creighton too inconsistent. Baylor rolls them probably and advances. And then your 7-2 matchup would be Missouri against Arizona. I like Arizona in this one, but it's, again, a Pac-12 weaker conference versus Missouri, SEC stronger conference. Missouri, I see leading that game up to maybe the last 6-7 minutes, and then Zona pulling it off and escaping in that game. That's very much what I see for that one. And again, I think one of my other brackets, I might have picked Missouri to win that game. But either way, I had Missouri against Arizona in this second round. The second round games for your Midwest bracket, if I were correct, it would be number 1 Houston against number 9 Auburn. Yeah, Auburn's decent, but Houston probably still gets them. And Houston I see as being the second weakest 1 seed. But yeah, I think still they'll be able to handle Auburn for the second round. If I'm correct here, the next one would be number 12 Drake against Indiana, number 4. And Drake, they're good, but not if it is Indiana that comes out of that game, yeah. If it's Kent State, though, against Drake, then I definitely think Kent State has a much easier time. But Indiana, I still like against Drake. Second round matchup for this next one here, the 6 seed Iowa State against the 3 seed, is Xavier. I actually like Iowa State in this one. I like the Cyclones in this one. Actually, my brother's a big Iowa State fan. I text him, I said, does Iowa State have somebody that can match up with Jack Nunge, again, another former Iowa player that transferred out and went to Xavier and has done very, very well there? I have no problem at all with him doing well there. And they're like, yeah, they got a couple, my brother says, a couple guys on the Iowa State bench match him height-wise. So I'm like, okay, as long as you don't have somebody like Nunge, a good, 3-4 inches over other players in the post position especially, getting rebounds and stuff, I think that's a tougher matchup. And Xavier as well, going up against Iowa State, who's a more fundamental team, a more defense team, I can see Xavier struggling there and Iowa State advancing. Then you have Penn State against Texas, the 10 seed against the 2 seed, and no, I don't really see a problem here. I think it's Texas. Now, do they roll? Maybe not. Again, I see this again being more of a struggle second round, and Texas again might trail in this game, especially when we get close to the end, like maybe the last 5-6 minutes. But I don't quite think Penn State will have enough in the tank there to finish off a 2-seed Texas. I could be dead wrong, but we'll see. Don't forget my pick last year to win it all lost in the first round as a 2 seed. So Texas is a 2 seed. We'll see where they go. But Yeah, and again, they've had some inconsistencies this year. They're 26-8 as a 2 seed, but they're coming out of a really tough conference, so there you go. All right, let's move on to the East bracket. Our second round here would be Purdue versus Memphis, the 1 versus the 8. What did I say? I said Purdue is our weakest 1 seed. I see Memphis advancing. That's right, I'm taking the 8 over the 1. We saw the 9 over the 1 here 2 years ago when it was Illinois. Again, that year they were my pick to win it all against Loyola Chicago, a very famous Cinderella. The 9 beat the 1, and I remember sitting there on the couch being pissed off because I'm like, how could I not bet on these guys again? But there you go. This time Memphis. What I've seen from Memphis, they can take Purdue. Purdue is a team that can lose, even in the Big Ten. Yep, they prove, they can throw up some losses there. So Memphis advances, the 8 over the 1. And Purdue would be the first team to have a 1 seed to fall in the opening weekend. Next up would be, in my matchup here, Duke versus Tennessee. And as much as I'm not a big ACC fan this year, if it is Duke, I think they advance. I think they can take Tennessee. So I have Duke advancing to the Sweet 16. Next up would be Kentucky versus Kansas State, the Battle of the K's. Kansas State. I think this is a much easier matchup for them here, and they roll to get to the Sweet 16. And our last one here is Michigan State versus Marquette. Guess what? This East bracket, I don't like my 1 or my 2 seeds. Michigan State advances over Marquette and leaves it wide open for a lower seeded team to advance. We saw this with UCLA a couple of years ago. Sometimes there is that bracket where your 1, 2, 3 seeds fall off, and it leaves it wide open for somebody else to take it from underneath. Loyola Chicago was another one here a few years ago that did that. I think it was 2018, the year they did that, and got to the Final Four. But Michigan State, I see advancing over Marquette. Marquette has shown, even in the Big Ten, a pretty good conference. There's some games that they're just not 100%. They're just not playing as a great team altogether. And Michigan State's a team that can, when the moment comes, when the chips are down and when they're like kind of gotten a couple punches against them, they can come back and do it. So I like Michigan State in that game to advance to the Sweet 16. Let's flip over now to the West Conference. Our first round winners advancing here would be, and the first one would be Kansas versus Arkansas, the 1 versus the 8. I like the 1 here, Kansas. Yeah, I think they handle of the 1 seeds in the second round. I think Kansas and Bama again are the 2 that we'll get my light source back here again. These are the 2 that I think struggle the least as the 1 seeds. Next matchup would be number 12 VCU against number 4 UConn, and I'm sorry VCU, but UConn. I think UConn would very much handle that one. And UConn I also do like if it happens to be St. Mary's over VCU. I like UConn against St. Mary's too. Next matchup would be our 6 seed TCU against our 3 seed Gonzaga. The Zags. I got to pick the Zags again here. And finally, we have number 7 seed Northwestern against UCLA, if I'm correct. And yeah, Northwestern, again, I can see giving UCLA fits, but I think UCLA will advance. Northwestern, again, they're a team you don't really want to face, not only first round, but second round, too. And if they start getting that belief and that momentum going, they are a team I would very much fear. But Memphis, I think, on the opposite side, they're going up against number 1 Purdue. They also, I see, having that same fire in them. So there you go. For the Sweet 16 matchups, here we go. Going back to the South bracket, our final 4 teams there in that particular bracket are going to be Bama versus Virginia and Baylor versus Arizona. And this one, we'll start with Bama, Virginia. Again, this is one where I can see Bama, okay, they pour it on in the first round, win pretty easily probably against Corpus Christi. Maryland, they might struggle a little bit more, but they'll probably still win by 9 or 10 points. Virginia, I can see them, as long as, Virginia doesn't keep them under, say, 60 points, because Bama's a little bit more of a high-scoring team, that could be a slaughter. That could be 20 points to Bama. That could be a slaughter. But it really depends on how strong Virginia's defense is. And if they're not strong, like they have not been strong in some games this year, Bama rolls them. Roll Tide. Then you have the number 3 Baylor against number 2 Arizona. This is where a few weeks ago I actually sat around with my mom and my brother, and we were both like, if we had to pick a team today, it would be Baylor. this is where I see Baylor coming through, and I see Baylor beating the 2 seed and advancing to the Elite Eight. Next up would be the Midwest bracket. Our 4 matchups here would be Houston versus Indiana and Iowa State versus Texas. And Iowa State had to play Texas in the Big 12, and I know my brother is particularly not happy with if that happens to be the matchup again. But for Houston versus Indiana, shocker, I like the Hoosiers. I like the Hoosiers in this game. As much as I haven't trusted them this year, I like the Hoosiers in this game. Houston is a team that can be beat. Absolutely. I think they're a team that can be beat. And correct me if I'm wrong here, that would be to get to Houston, because I think the Elite Eight, or is it just the Final Four? I think it's just the Final Four, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. They're the ones that play in Houston, right? I don't think I've got the dates, but I don't have the locations for where they're playing. I have the locations for like the opening rounds and stuff, but I don't have the locations for when they get to the Final Four or beyond. So, I forget where they start playing at Houston. I think it is the Final Four only. Yeah, it's only the Final Four. So I see Houston not having home court advantage when they get there. I don't see them even leaving the Sweet 16. So I pick an upset there. The 4 over the 1. Indiana will advance to the Elite 8. Then Iowa State versus Texas. Cyclones got, I think it was this far last year, and they were as an 11 seed, 12 seed last year, or something like that. And they kind of shocked everybody and made it that far. Yeah, I see them losing in this round too. It's Texas, the Longhorns. I know, my brother will be horns down, but I'll be horns up. All right. Let's move on to the East bracket here. My 2 matchups here would be Memphis versus Duke, and Kansas State versus Michigan State. So if it is Memphis against Duke, again, I got to pick Memphis. I like Memphis a lot this year. I'm going out on a limb, and I'm picking Memphis here again. Duke is beatable. Yep, and in this round, yeah, I see that. And for their coach's opening season, though, by the way, getting to the Sweet 16, I think that's still a respectable result. I know a lot of people have been kissing his ass this week and saying, "Oh, he's the best coach, first-time coach we've seen in decades and stuff." If that was true, I think Duke would have a much stronger record. They would be a higher seed. I think the committee kind of knew what they were doing when they put Duke at a 5 seed. So, yeah. They put them there for a reason. That's all I'm going to say. Then when we get Kansas State, though, versus Michigan State, the Wildcats, again, coming out of a tougher conference, this is where that's going to show. Michigan State, I think, is the last Big Ten team I have in there this year, aside from Indiana. But, yeah, historically, Big Ten teams, they get a lot in there, but a lot of them exit in the first 2 rounds. Third round is where I see Michigan State falling short and Kansas State advancing. All right, then our last Sweet 16 matchups would be Kansas versus UConn, a couple of blue bloods there, versus Gonzaga and UCLA, newer blue blood, so to speak, if you don't count UCLA as an older blue blood. In that one, so yes, I do have a rematch in that one. Let's see where it goes. But first you got Kansas versus UConn. I'm sorry, UConn. Kansas might just roll you here, and it might be a kind of a repeat of what we saw here in 2017, where Kansas kind of started to get a lot of momentum in that season, in that tournament particularly, and it was that, I think that was that Sweet 16 matchup for them where they had their biggest victory in the tournament. I think it was almost like a 30-point game or something ridiculous like that. And UConn, as good as they are, it's not going to be a 30-point game this time, I don't think, against Kansas. But, yeah, UConn, you can't quite do it. Gonzaga versus UCLA this year, though, I'll tell you what, if UCLA had played Gonzaga this year like they did, because remember, they did the Final Four game, the next year, Dick Vitale, baby, he came back to do the announcing for his first time back since he had been diagnosed with his the cancer. Was it throat cancer or thyroid, whichever it was. He came back, a big emotional moment and everything, and everybody replayed it a million times on Twitter, blah, blah, blah. And it was it was a rematch. It was Gonzaga against UCLA again. It was at UCLA, and it was going to be a heavy bout. And that game was over within the first 10 minutes, and Gonzaga rolled UCLA. Not even close. The UCLA took 3 timeouts in the first half. That's how fucking bad that game was. And we were all asleep before halftime, unfortunately. If that rematch had happened this year, and it will, according to my bracket, I like UCLA. I like UCLA to get the revenge win on this one. And it's tough. Like the adage says, sometimes it's very tough to beat a team 3 times. I know this is spread out over 3 years, but I like UCLA. I like the Bruins in this one. They advanced to the Elite Eight. So my Elite Eight teams, by the way, just to recap, are going to be Bama and Baylor from the South, Indiana and Texas from the Midwest, Memphis and Kansas State from the East, and Kansas and UCLA in the West. So, who advances, who becomes the champion of their respective bracket? In the South, Bama versus Baylor, the Battle of the Bees, and 2 teams out of the 2 great conferences. Bama, I think, does win this one. They do win, they advance, they go to the Final Four. Baylor is going to play them tough, but it's going to be Bama victory. Indiana versus Texas, this is where I see the Hoosiers really slipping up. This could be a very difficult game for them, and it might be a 20-25 point victory for Texas. Hook 'em horns. I think they advance, and they win the Midwest bracket. The East bracket winner, I was really close to saying, okay, I think Memphis can pull it off. We could see an 8 seed advance to the Final Four. But the Wildcats. It's the Wildcats. I see them doing a lot of damage down there in that bottom corner of the bracket. And as long as it's not Marquette, and as long as it's not Marquette on a big roll there, oh yeah, Kansas State wins. So they advance, and they are the victors in the East. In the West bracket, you've got UCLA versus Kansas. And this is where I see history repeating itself. Remember, Kansas, they went up against, was it Oregon? I thought it was Oregon. I want to say it was Oregon. And Oregon won. And they won handily. If it wasn't Oregon, it was North Carolina. One of the two. But yeah, I see Kansas losing this one, UCLA. I see UCLA going to the Final Four here. Their second Final Four in 3 years. Yeah, I see them doing well here. So again, recapping, Final Four are Bama, Kansas State, Texas, UCLA. So in this side of the bracket, so to speak, the South and the East, their matchup, it would be Bama versus Kansas State, and Kansas State being a 3 seed, the lowest seed to advance to the Final Four. And I know it's usually not considered that risky to take, 3 seeds, or a 3 seed or higher, basically. And again, I was really close to taking Memphis here, and some moments I kind of argue with myself. It's like, you should have done it. I mean, some of these lower seeds, they can make it. They can do it. But not quite this year. I see Bama versus Kansas State. Bama wins this one. And Roll Tide keeps rolling in Houston. Then you have Texas versus UCLA. This is probably, outside of maybe Penn State, the toughest challenge for Texas if my bracket turns out this way. If it's them versus Houston, in Houston, you got a good in-state rivalry there. I can still see, again, your more hardened, battle-hardened team winning that, and that would be Texas this year. That would be the Longhorns, almost undeniably. Even though they've got more losses than Houston, remember who you're playing against in the regular season. So that being said, yeah, so I do think UCLA, if it's not Houston to go to the and by the way, sorry, I missaid that. It would be if Houston had to play Texas to win the Midwest, they would not be playing in Houston, so they would not get the home crowd. You have to get to the Final Four to get to Houston. So yeah, I see Texas advancing though. So they beat UCLA. So it would be Bama versus Texas in the championship on April the 3rd. And I know Bama's the number 1 overall seed, and Texas is a 2 seed, and they're a little, they're coming from a battle-hardened conference, and some people have said they've been overseeded as a 2. Hook 'em horns, baby. All right. I like Texas. So Texas is my pick this year to win the national championship. And I know it's a weird thing, because again, I've bet against them a few times this year. Sometimes it's paid off, sometimes it hasn't. They had a lot of trouble again with the Chris Beard situation, which I'm still, the fact that he got picked up so quickly at Ole Miss is unsettling to me. I know the charges were dropped against him and everything, but he has always been, in my opinion, one of the most animated coaches and one of the roughest looking coaches. Like, he's a guy that literally looks like he's going to take you around a back alley and just beat the living shit out of you. So when those charges came up, battery charges stuff, I was like, I'm not surprised. So they had that rough patch there. But since then, man, there's a couple games you see them play. They have not looked back. They have not looked back at all from their time with Chris Beard there. So I see Texas, and especially too, remember this, they came off a humiliating loss, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this was last year. Texas Southern, the 14 over the 3 last year. Again, if it was last year or the year before, whichever one it was, I believe it was last year. That's a humiliating loss. That's one that people joke about you the following years and stuff. Remember Virginia. Remember them. 2018 was when they were the 1 seed, and they got taken down as the 1 seed. First ever 1 seed to fall. Opening round. What did they do the next year? They came back and won the whole thing. Texas, I see the same fate. And again, whether that's a year ago or 2 years ago, the Texas lost to Texas Southern, yeah. Hook 'em horns. All right. That's all I got. And by the way, this would be also kind of ceremonious too, because not this year, but next year they will also exit the Big 12 and go over to the SEC, where they're probably going to get their asses kicked more regularly. We'll see. But them in Oklahoma as well, of course. But in the meantime, those are my picks for March Madness. And Ant-Man I can't recommend. No. Too messy, just not good. So, yeah. There we go. That's all I got for now. So we'll catch everybody next time. Until then, I'm having a fun off season. I'm going to enjoy some college basketball over the weekend and beyond.